Um, so hello again, everyone. My name is Marlene Enselberger. I'm the Executive Director of the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians, which is based here in the beautiful city of Vienna. And today I have the pleasure to take you through this online press release. And I would like to welcome you all to this press conference on behalf of the Observatory, but also on behalf of our partner organizations, the IIRF, the International Institute for Religious Freedom, and OLIRE, the Observatory on Religious Freedom for Latin America. We have had the honor to collaborate with both those organizations on this seemingly growing and worrying phenomenon of the chilling effect among Christians. So thank you all for joining and your interest in this topic. So today we will finally launch our latest common report, which has the title Perceptions of Self-Censorship, Confirming and Understanding the Chilling Effect, which includes cases from France, Germany, Colombia, and Mexico. So firstly, Dennis Petri, who is one of the authors of the report, will present the main findings of the report to you, and afterwards we will have a panel of experts giving their input on the topic. In the end, we will have some time for Q&A, and there is also a quick technical side note. If you already have questions during the presentations, just write them into the chat and we will try to address them later on during the Q&A session. Also, I want to inform you, and you probably saw that already on your screen, that this session will be recorded and live streamed. So if you don't want to be seen, just turn off the cameras. Good. I think we're ready to start. So I don't know if you're already familiar with the topic at all, if you ever thought about it before, but you might ask, like, what motivated us to conduct this research? Or you might think, well, I mean, finally, someone is addressing this issue because, I don't know, you experienced it yourself, you heard about it, you know, that it happened to friends around you or family members. So the backdrop of our research is that in recent years, we have closely observed the growing limitations and infringements of the human rights of Christians in Europe, but also in Latin America. So one freedom that particularly stood out as being more and more under pressure was freedom of speech. And as most of us know, freedom of speech is deeply interlinked with other fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of religion, but also freedom of conscience. So in the last decade, OIDAC has alone collected almost 400 cases in which Christians fell victim to intolerance and discrimination for, you know, simply publicly voicing their opinion in accordance with their belief. So as a consequence, we saw people losing their jobs, being put on hate speech trials, and sadly enough, some even received death threats. And all that because they just publicly addressed issues related to family, life, bioethics, or morals. So in order for you to get a better picture of what we're talking about, there's one specific example that I want to talk about. It's the story of Julia Rankowitz. She was a midwifery student at the University of Nottingham. And after it was found out that she's an active member of pro-life student society at the university, her fitness to practice was all of a sudden questioned. So she then faced a suspension from her studies for 4 months because her fitness to practice was investigated. And as you can imagine, this heavily disrupted her education. Fortunately enough, in the end, she won the case, but the whole case definitely sent a threatening signal to other Christian students. And the message was, if your opinion is not in accordance with the university's views or ideology, it's probably better to keep silent. So Cases like these can therefore set up a dangerous spiral of violence among Christian students at universities, but also in other life areas. I also have to admit myself that I remember when I was a student that I've been in multiple situations during my academic career where I've actively censored myself because I was afraid if I didn't censor myself that this could have real negative consequences for my grading, for example. So I'm sure if you reflect on it for a minute or two, you probably have done the same in the past, maybe at your workplace, in school, or even among your friends. So in the end, I would say it raises the legitimate question of how is it possible in a mature, liberal, democratic society that stands for tolerance, diversity, and inclusive and open discourse, that people are frightened to freely speak their mind? So that was one of the questions among many others. And after observing all these cases in the last decade, that we actually wanted to understand. We wanted to understand the nature, scope, and intensity of the chilling effect. We wanted to see if it actually exists, and if so, what it is, and how Christians perceive it, and how their lives are affected by it. And I would say at this point is where I'll hand over to Dennis Petrie, who will dive in a bit deeper into the report with you, as he is also one of the authors of the report. But first, I'm going to introduce him a little bit to you. So Dennis is currently working as the International Director of the International Institute for Religious Freedom, but he's also the founder and scholar at large at the Observatory of Religious Freedom in Latin America. Additionally, he's a professor at the Universidad Latinoamericana de Ciencia y Tecnología, I hope I said it right, and the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences. Lastly, he's the director of the Foundation Platform for Social Transformation. He also holds a PhD from the Free University in Amsterdam and has a background in political science. So thank you, Dennis, for joining us today. And as one of the few experts on secular intolerance and self-censorship, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Madeleine, for hosting this panel. And thank you also to all the other panelists who have accepted to be part of this conversation. So this report on self-censorship, this research project, goes back a long time. For almost a decade, I've been researching, not full-time, obviously, I've been doing other things, but researching secular intolerance in the West, but also in other parts of the world. And after a while, I started to feel a little bit stuck in my reflection about secular intolerance. I did not really know how to make additional contributions on the topic, because I felt that everything had already been said and studied and analyzed and documented. Of course, incident documentation is important, is an ongoing priority. Raising it in advocacy settings is also important. But I really came to feel I had exhausted the subject, not just myself, but many other scholars on the topic. And why do I say this? Because I think that by now, and of course, I want to be humble, and there's probably a lot we don't know. But when we look at the topic of secular intolerance or secularism, or radical secularism, or however you want to name it, to call it, we do have a clear idea, a clear understanding where it comes from. Its philosophical roots, and also the main drivers behind the phenomenon. And the other panelists can probably refer to that more in depth, but we have an idea where it comes from. We also know how it manifests itself. And this is to a large part thanks to the work of other organizations that are represented in this panel. Of course, the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe, but also the Christian Institute. And so we know about the court cases, we know about the threats, etc. And so we kind of have a good idea, as I said, where it comes from and how it manifests itself. And by the way, I should mention, most of this is also summarized in the 2020 issue of the International Journal for Religious Freedom, which is the main product of the International Institute for Religious Freedom, and that is edited by my colleague Janet Buckingham. So really, how can we go further in this topic? That's really what gave origin to this research, and so this concept of self-censorship kept coming up, and it was mentioned frequently in much of the fieldwork that I did, also in the United Kingdom. At the Christian Institute, and colleagues at the Christian Institute were very helpful, and so I thought, well, this is really the most promising angle to try to understand this phenomenon, because, as I said, we know where secular intolerance comes from, we know how it manifests itself, but what we don't know is how intense it is. We have a hard time gauging its scope, its intensity, and also trying to determine how it affects the church and Christian life. And the problem with secular intolerance in general, but also the self-censorship phenomenon, is that it's actually very often very small and seemingly insignificant issues. When someone resorts to self-censorship because at school, for example, that person doesn't want to be mocked or ridiculed, that's a very small thing, in fact. But all those small incidents kind of add up. And that's where we can use the analogy of death by 1,000 cuts. One cut really does not make much of a difference, doesn't even hurt, but many cuts can kill you, and in a very literal sense can kill freedom of expression of Christians, and therefore also Christian life. And so that's the background of this study, of this research. And so now I want to say a couple things about the methodology that we adopted. So we decided to adopt an exploratory methodology based on 4 case studies, qualitative case studies. I had the privilege of coordinating this project together with my good ally Teresa, and 4 country researchers gathered data in 4 different countries. In France, Germany, Mexico, and Colombia, in 4 different sectors. It's also quite important because we want to try to understand whether self-censorship manifests itself differently in education, in the media, in the public realm, and in the church itself. Basically, what inspired us in our research setup are all those really similar research projects that try to bring visibility to understudied subjects. And that's actually what's the case with self-censorship. Many people talk about it, but as I said, it's all very seemingly insignificant incidents, and therefore they're not really given much attention, and therefore they're not visible. And so we knew we needed an inductive approach based on open questions to get the information out about this subject, and that's what we did, inspired by other research designs that have similarly tried to shed light on issues, on matters that are really not very visible. So that's the methodological approach that we followed, and of course the nature of the research was absolutely exploratory, aimed at understanding the phenomenon a little bit better, and also confirming it is real. And so now turning to our findings, based on the interviews we conducted, it's very hard to generalize because we only surveyed a very small sample. But we can confirm that the self-censorship phenomenon is real, first of all. And I think that is a major finding, because before this research, it was only a hypothesis, and using academic jargon. It was only a hypothesis, but we had not been able to confirm it. And I think that's the main value of this research. Another finding is that it is applicable in very similar ways to Europe and Latin America. You would think that Latin America is maybe a more conservative continent, but that's very far from the truth. In reality, self-censorship is also something we encountered in many different ways in Latin America. One important finding as well is that history matters and historical background matters. So the historic anti-clericalism in Mexico and France, but also in former East Germany, has a huge impact on how people live out their faith. So self-censorship is a reality across the board, but it's kind of worse or more pronounced in countries with a very strong tradition of political secularism. And then, thanks to this research, we got a better understanding of the sectors of the self-censorship phenomenon itself. And I won't go into too much detail because the other panelists can speak to it. But one of the things we understood very quickly is that actually many of the people we talked to that experienced self-censorship did not really have the awareness that self-censorship was a real thing, and that they were self-censoring in their own lives, and that they also do not have the tools to recognize it. And through our long conversations with the different people in our sample that we interviewed, we got them to a point where they ended up admitting that yes, or recognizing self-censorship in their own lives. Another thing we found is that there is sometimes, very often, a confusion between caution and self-censorship. Many of the people we interviewed said, we don't want to offend and we don't want to create a scandal, which is a legitimate stance, I would say, but not when it's confused with self-censorship. And that is also something that I think the panelists can unpack, but that we found. Then differences between sectors, the 4 sectors that we surveyed, aren't too big. There weren't that many noteworthy differences between these sectors, but there's specific nuances depending on the country. And now, just to finish on the implications and recommendations of our research, I want to mention a quote that has really impacted me. A quote by one of the leading Mexican bishops, bishops of the Catholic Church that we interviewed. And he told us, thank you for forcing us to think about these things, to think about self-censorship. And so in a way, by doing the research and collecting the data about self-censorship, we contributed to opening the eyes of a large part of the church, really represented by this bishop in this example, and it really made me think. I interpreted this as a request for help coming from the church, and saying we need you to help us understand the self-censorship phenomenon better, and develop training, because actually that's also what we found. And in many of the interviews, is that actually those Christians that had been exposed to some form of training, had some degree of awareness about religious persecution and the subtleties of the secular intolerance phenomenon were better prepared to respond to them and do not defer to self-censorship as easily. So I think that is the main recommendation that we can take away from this research. Of course, much more research is needed, and it was based on a small sample. It was an exploratory design. There's a lot more that we can try to discover and understand. But it's an important start, I think, and an important step forward in our reflection about secular intolerance. Then, of course, there is a lot of training that can be done, religious literacy training for civil servants. I want to salute the fantastic work the Christian Institute is doing in that realm. I've seen that it has had a very positive impact. So there's a lot that can be done in that area as well. But I think we should also we have a very strong mandate or a moral duty to also inform and raise awareness within the church communities about this phenomenon and help them respond to it. So yes, I'm going to end here to leave the other panelists to comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And I totally agree with you. I think this was one of the most important first steps to take in the right direction to address this problem. And yeah, thank you again for giving us this very insightful overview of the report. So we will now come to the second part of our online event, which is the panel of experts, which will hopefully enrich us with their various perspectives, but also their expertise on the issue. So the first person that I would like to introduce to you is Friederike Böllmann. She's author of the German case study. So Friederike currently is the head of quality management and social policy at an international charitable NGO in Vienna. She used to be a postdoctoral teaching and research fellow at the Department of the Study of Religion at Leipzig University, Germany, and at the Department of Sociology at the University of Education in Freiburg, Germany. She has a background in communication and media studies, cultural studies, and Russian language, as well as European studies. While a teaching and research associate at the Department of Sociology at Philipps University of Marburg, Friederike wrote her PhD thesis on organizing and legitimizing interests of religious communities in the European public sphere. Good to have you here, Friederike, and please enrich us with your thoughts.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me there. Well, from an outside perspective, it looks like we have a very comfortable situation in Germany, right? But from my findings and also from quantitative analysis that I've seen, one must say that the formally guaranteed freedom of speech doesn't automatically guarantee a plurality and well-balanced climate of opinion. So things that I heard and noted very often was the complaint of absolutely irrational debates, identity politics, saying you are not criticized for what you say, but what you are, and therefore excluded as a person from discourse. So many people said it's not about strict legal cases, things like that, or persecution even, but everyone that I interviewed noted something like a change in climate or a narrowing, to put it in a different way, a narrowing of an opinion corridor, which is another concept that I like to use in this sense, borrowed from a Scandinavian scholar. Well, in Germany, I found various depths of change or adaptation from, in principle, less public activity in general, to something that I would describe as caution, hesitance, or political correctness, to something like self-censorship in a more narrow sense, like omitting information, whole topics, my opinion if it deviates, and contact information. It was interesting for me to find out that all interviewees, no matter from what sphere they came, we analyzed 4 different spheres, as you learned, all interviewees knew the risk of being pushed into a corner, or at worst, being excluded from public discourse at all. And many interviewees repeated that there seem to be some lines that you shouldn't cross in public discourse in Germany right now, and we can only infer that from the findings in a inductive way, right? But I could say now that those lines are, for example, thou shalt not be a Pope loyal Catholic. Thou shalt not be close to right extremism. There's a fairly new party called AfD, Alternative for Germany. And if you're seen next to a person of that party, or if you, as a journalist, invite someone from that party, it means that you're immediately excluded from further debate. Another thing that seems to be an absolute no-go is not being Christian or referring to a Christian heritage, but it is to be close to evangelicalism, not in the sense of being Protestant, because we have an accepted church, the Protestant Church of Germany, but everything that refers to free churches, you never hear a politician identifying with that. It's largely seen as irrational, backwards, things like that. So this is a line no one crosses in politics, in media, wherever. But we should work very concisely here. Many interviewees told that the problem they fought in debates was not that they were Christian or were arguing from a Christian point of view, but that they were representing a conservative point of view in ethics. So there really must be, we really have to work on a better distinction there. What is really the problem here? I indicated that in the end of the study. The main differences I found within or in comparison between the 4 different spheres that we analyzed, they vary across according to the, I would say, to the structure of the respective field, mainly the power structure, career opportunities, the shared knowledge, and also the number of possible choices people have if they don't follow the mainstream road, let's say. While in the religious field, you can, as a member at least, you can choose to wherever you want to belong. But this isn't true for people who strive for an academic career, for example. There is no alternative landscape of many universities that you could change to. So it wasn't, it was surprising for me actually to find that the German case reveals universities as the most hostile environments. And the largest extent of self-censorship I found in my example in the academic realm. In politics as well as the media, all interviewees agree that Christian decision makers must have just slept away the upswing of left and green efforts to overtake politics and the media over the last 20 to 30 years. So all of a sudden they find themselves not in the established position anymore, but in the minority. So that gives a totally different, so makes a totally different condition for them to participate in public debate. And also it narrows down career opportunities for politicians and journalists, of course. As to, I don't want to overstretch the time. So as to the results, there is evidence of, I would say, there's evidence of a growing spiral of silence, to quote a classic theory of mass communication. It speaks for itself. The less certain opinions are being heard, the less people think they are standard and normal, and so they will keep silent about it. And this is something I would say is very true for Germany in all spheres, but the consequences of the narrowing of the opinion corridor are harder in academia, politics, and therefore, as it is coupled, in media as well. So much for the results. The main challenge I found is that a social phenomenon such as self-censorship is hard to grasp at all. So in the study, I suggested a couple of methodological refinements. So I already said that we have to make a good, very good operating distinction between conservative and Christian thought in order to really determine what is reason here for self-censorship or for chilling effect. And another thing stems from a pure logical problem. From which point of view do we want to talk about, or do we want to measure the difference between things to say and things not said? Is it from the perspective of the researcher saying, or is it from the perspective of, let's say, theological teaching? Or is it from the perspective of the individual being asked? In each case, you could make huge differences. For example, we had cases where the researcher would say, well, but you already cut down a lot of your opinion. And the individual would say, but this is, no, I thought this is not okay anymore. And I learned, and obviously the church was being backward. And so I want to adapt to this new situation, and no one feels any regret. So in a strict sense of the term, which we cannot talk about self-censorship anymore then. So we have to elaborate a very concise definition of what we're looking for. So to have a very profound approach, methodological approach. And the last thing I wanted to say is, if we talk about a chilling effect, we always need to ask people, and we have to continue doing so in further research, if their change in action is actually has happened in response or anticipation of their surroundings or their interpretation of their surroundings, meaning nothing else than you have to be able in your study to distinguish between something like zeitgeist or something like currents that you can that can come from anywhere, but they don't necessarily have to do with legal cases or reporting of what in other studies would be called secular intolerance. So only if there's an allegiance to that, we can actually talk about a chilling effect. But these are things that, and it's wonderful to have had this explorative study, because now we know what we have to look for, and we know how to how to make the concepts we use more precise, and all this now on an empirical basis. And this is why I thought it was a great challenge to nail the putting of self-censorship to a methodological wall. Thanks so far.
Madeleine, I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. Your microphone is off.
Thank you. Okay, so all the nice words to you, Friederike, were just for nothing. No, thank you for opening our eyes for the findings about Germany. I thought they were really.
Heard me? Did you?
Yeah, no, I heard you.
Oh, I thought.
You didn't hear my thankful remarks, but now you did. Okay, so let's quickly jump to Simon, who is one of our external experts. Thank you, Simon, for joining us today. So Simon is a Deputy Director for Public Affairs at the Christian Institute. He's a solicitor by training. He has been with the Institute for 25 years, and he's campaigning for free speech, helping Christians think through issues like abortion and LGBT politics, and speaking out in the media. So he's really in the field of this, and I can't wait for you to share your experience on this. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to start by thanking the authors of the report. As you just heard, I've been doing Christian public affairs for 25 years, and for 15 of those years, the Christian Institute has been involved in fighting cases. But I still found that this report expanded my own understanding of what self-censorship means for others, and actually what it means for me as well. I think that we're all engaged in a great deal of this self-censorship, and so I want to thank the authors and the sponsors of this report. I think it's a very valuable piece of work which deserves wide dissemination. At the Christian Institute, we do something like 350 public meetings a year all around the UK, and one of the most common questions we get asked, we always allow time for Q&A, one of the most common questions we get asked is along the lines of, can I say X? Is it legal for me to express a Christian view about abortion or sexuality or transgenderism? Informed Christians, and we're an evangelical organisation, so overwhelmingly that's our kind of constituency. Informed evangelical Christians are asking us quite seriously, are there laws to prevent us expressing a Christian view about same-sex marriage, or about the fact that a man cannot become a woman, and so on? That's the level of self-censorship that we've reached, where people think that it must somehow be against the law to express these views, and of course it's not. And one of the things that the report says, and one of the things I want to strongly underline, is that certainly here in the UK, the law is almost always much better than the culture when it comes to free speech. The law is almost always strongly in favour of your freedom to speak, but the culture is not. Society is not. People are told, it's communicated to them in 1,000 different ways that there are certain things you can't say, and I keep using those three examples because they are the key ones. Views, Christian beliefs about sexuality and marriage, Christian beliefs about sex and gender, and Christian beliefs about life in the womb. And so the other way in which we see this self-censorship is through the casework that we do, and of course we see actual censorship taking place sometimes where well, let me start with the self-censorship. The self-censorship is that people like street preachers will come to us and they will say, when I'm out street preaching, I don't tend to talk about things like sex because I don't need to, I just focus on the gospel. But people always ask me questions about sexuality, and they're trying to get me into trouble by drawing me into a conversation about these controversial issues. Am I free to give a faithful Christian answer? To which, of course, our answer is yes, you can. The law protects your ability to speak about these things. But again, they feel that pressure to self-censor. And these are street preachers. I mean, if you and I think about a street preacher out on the street, it's a pretty bold profession. You have to be a pretty tough kind of person to be willing to stand on a street corner and preach. And yet even they feel this pressure to self-censor. And then, and sometimes the authorities get it wrong. The police do get it wrong. The police do sometimes tell street preachers that they can't say certain things. They sometimes even arrest them. They sometimes even prosecute them. Now, again, the law is better than the culture. And so every single street preacher case we have ever taken on, we've won. And not only have we made sure that our street preacher doesn't get prosecuted or doesn't get convicted of a crime, we actually help them to sue the police, and we win. And often the police will settle out of court because they know they haven't got a leg to stand on. The street preacher was free to explain a Christian view on marriage or whatever. It wasn't against the law, and the police officer who arrested him was wrong. But there is still, when these cases happen, and again the report points this out, even when we win the cases, it still has a chilling effect. The fact that the police did that, the fact that sometimes even prosecutors are willing to follow that up, it has a chilling effect. And so a major part of the work that we've always done is to try to help Christians to know how to talk about controversial issues. We try to make sure that people are informed, and again the report is clear and strong on this, and I very strongly welcome the recommendations in the report. It is so important that Christians are informed. It's important that they understand other people's beliefs and understand how other people might react to what they say. It's important that they seek to be faithful in what they say. It's also important that they seek to be wise in what they say and seek to be persuasive in what they say. And that job of work which the report advocates is very important. But that only serves to confirm again that there is this self-censorship, that there is this cultural pressure. If you're having to train people to give them the courage to speak, that just confirms that there is pressure on them not to speak. But I mean, my view on this is that if, as Christians, we can consistently speak well on these controversial issues where people tend to get upset and tend to want to shut us up, if we can speak well, we do several things. One is that we give other people permission to agree with us. People hear us, they think, oh, he's expressed himself quite well. She's explained that issue very well. I agree with that. I would happily get behind that. So you give people permission to agree with you, and that then has the effect that it creates space in the public square for other people to express similar views. So it's important that we do speak well on these issues. But the pressure is real. As I say, because we do cases, we have had to help people who have lost their jobs merely for holding a Christian view on some of these issues. People who have lost their livelihoods, people who have been prosecuted, people who have been sued. And in many ways, we talk a lot about cancel culture these days, and there are many ways in which that can manifest itself. But the softer end of it is, as has been touched on, and the reputational damage of expressing orthodox Christian views about some of these issues. I have worked with a lot of courageous people over the decades in this work, and I have also seen some of those people give in to the cancel culture. I've seen them pull out of speaking on certain issues. I've seen them withdraw. The ultimate example, of course, of this self-censorship are those who flip, who cross over to the other side. They for a time, they will sort of appear to hold the views that we hold dear on these issues, but then they will cross over and they will become pro-LGBT or pro-abortion or whatever it is, and that's the ultimate proof, really, of what this cultural pressure and what this self-censorship can lead to, is that people think, no, it's too hard holding and expressing these views. I'm going to go and express the views that they want me to express, because then they'll like me. And I'm afraid, we do see people doing that. So I'm very grateful, as I say, to the authors of this report for drawing attention to this phenomenon. And particularly, the recommendations at section 6 from page 26 of the report on the importance of advocacy, on the importance of religious literacy training. I mean, I could say a lot about that, but the importance of raising awareness within the church, these things are absolutely key, and I very much hope that these recommendations will be taken forward.
Thank you so much, Simon, for talking to us, but also actually helping Christians in those concrete situations that can be quite desperate. Yeah, it's always still shocking to hear that. So now we will go to another continent. We will switch to South America. And so our next expert is Teresa Flores. And she is also one of the authors of the report, and she focused on Mexico and Colombia. So Teresa is a lawyer by the Catholic University of Santo Toribio de Mogrovejo, I hope I said it correctly, in Peru. And she also holds a master's degree in constitutional law and human rights by the Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos. She has experience in the research and study of religious freedom in the region, and is currently executive director of the Observatory of Religious Freedom in Latin America. So Teresa, please take us to Latin America.
Thank you very much, Madeleine. Well, actually, I will have loved to share with you a summary of the impressions of the interviewees when they have dealt with this issue of self-censorship, but the time is short, so I'm only going to emphasize some of the transversal elements identified in all areas from both countries, Mexico and Colombia. The first one is that although the majority of the participants recognize a limited freedom to express their convictions in different spheres of society, very few identify this situation as a process of self-censorship. The participants use terms such as self-regulation, prudence, use of a democratic language, strategy, or maybe saying the politically correct thing or Christian charity. Those who say they were able to openly express their own religion, their own beliefs, and also their position on sensitive or controversial issues, did so, but always recognizing that it was a freedom earned, but with a price to pay. And this price is different or varies in intensity and frequency. In the particular case of Mexico, the historical secularism and the Marxist secular education throughout the country have established the belief that religion should only be ascribed to the private sphere, with no option to manifest itself in the public sphere. In this case, not talking about religion or one's own convictions is part of a normalized cultural pattern that few recognize as self-censorship. The second point is that those who say that they did not feel self-censored were people who had followed training, sometimes related to or necessary training for their jobs. For instance, deputies, activist students, priests, pastors, academics, all of them said that had gone through a guided training process they felt freely to speak about these controversial issues. For instance, someone also mentioned that the biblical training received by the evangelical sector is deeper, and that this influences the ability of some of its members to speak without fear about the Christian faith or about issues related to life, marriage, and family from a Christian perspective, even if they were in an adverse environment. Also, although the average Protestant Christian within the interviewees is more, this sector, this Protestant Christian group can be more educated in their faith, this does not necessarily mean that they are fully prepared to communicate their message to a more secular public or audience. And therefore, on some occasions, some of them do it, but aggressively or confronting other beliefs. And this has caused them credibility and important spaces in debates on issues relevant to society. The following point is that in the different fields of study, in the different areas, church, politics, media, education, the lower the level of hierarchy or the narrower the level of dependency, the higher the possibility of falling into self-censorship. Those members of government offices, teachers, students, or workers who depend on a superior or the support of a political party or an institutional structure to carry out their activities feel more pressure to follow the guidelines established by said superior. And just 2 more points. A recurring theme during the investigation was the recognition of virtual platforms as the main scenarios of hostility against expressions of faith or opinions on sensitive issues, almost always carried out by people with an adherence to the Christian faith. The social media is often the best scenario for being criticized, for being even threatened. And of course, the reputation gain transcends the sphere, the private spheres, and influence the sphere of education, the workplace, the party, because sometimes the pastor or maybe bosses, they don't want to be linked with these Christians. They don't want to be linked with people that is showed as problematic or intolerant or discriminator. It is also important to mention that there are different dynamics related to Christians and self-censorship. This was also one of the findings while interviewing people from Mexico and Colombia, and is that there is a group that does not self-censor and accepts the consequences, convinced that their faith is worth it. There is other group, and these are those who self-censor for fear of legal, fear to social sanction. And also there are also those who, due to constant self-censorship and an almost non-existent accompaniment in the faith, are losing their faith, or they stop seeing the characteristics related to self-censorship as a problem. So in general, I can say that as a result of the research in Mexico and in Colombia, we can say that the phenomenon of self-censorship is not only configured when a Christian does not openly manifest his Christian faith or his convictions or beliefs, but also refers to situations in which Christians cannot express their faith-based points of view on controversial issues. And although the chilling effect is commonly related to actions or omissions on a state level, the research reveals that social pressure is also very influential factors of self-censorship. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Very insightful. We will now switch a bit north to Canada. So our next panelist is Paul Rowe from Canada. He is currently professor, chair, and coordinator of political and international studies at Trinity Western University. He holds a PhD by McGill University, where he focused on politics of Christian minority communities in Middle Eastern states. He has spent extended time in the Middle East and continues to study the politics of religious groups in developing countries and at the global level. Thank you, Paul, for taking the time today and sharing your views with us. So please take the floor.
Thank you, Madeline. Everyone can hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so as you mentioned, my own research has tended to be on developing areas and specifically the Middle East and South Asia, but I will speak as a Canadian today and as a senior research fellow at the International Institute for Religious Freedom in Vancouver. So I think it's useful to think that actually Canada would be a very good place to conduct the study as well, because I think we're in no way immune from this effect. In fact, I think we're probably far further ahead of the European and Latin cases. I think it's useful to note that Canada is not an officially nor a constitutionally secular state, and there's no disestablishment clause in our constitution, unlike the United States. There's no mention of secularism at all in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution refers to God in its preamble. Nevertheless, religion and religiosity have increasingly featured as a wedge used by the political parties in Canada, and that has meant that religion is increasingly being used as a convenient political device, I would say, over the last 20 years. I could almost pinpoint the moment at which it became a convenient political device. And that has had a very significant impact, I think, on the social aspects of self-censorship among religious communities in Canada. So while there's a larger secularizing narrative behind these trends in Canada, I think it's inconsistent. And it represents more the wedge politics of the dominant parties and their constituencies and their interest bases. So by and large, the governing Liberal Party caters to an urban, self-professedly progressive and central Canadian constituency. Westerners, Christian evangelicals, and rural populations are not within their constituency. Their governing coalition is typically able to win sufficient vote share to put together a minority or a bare majority out of a plurality of votes. In fact, in the last 2 elections, the Liberal Party has won despite the fact that it did not even win a plurality of the votes. And so the Liberal Party, therefore, has managed to use at least the appearance of what we tend to call here in North America social conservatism, or really blatantly religion, as a wedge against which they cater to a very particular constituency. And they can not just cater to a specific constituency, but they can also find a coalition of other like-minded political parties that will support them. So just to highlight a few specific instances in which the government has made it very difficult for religious people with very particular perspectives to get along in Canadian society. In 2017, the Liberal government required all agencies applying for a summer jobs grant that actually their predecessors, the Conservatives, had implemented in the first place, to complete what they called an attestation that both the job and the organization's core mandate respect, these are the words, in fact, of the attestation, respect individual human rights in Canada, including the values underlying the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as other rights. And they went on to say specifically that these other rights include reproductive rights and the right to be free from discrimination on the basis of sex, religion, race, national or ethnic origin, color, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression. Many of those categories not actually ever having been mentioned in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, nor in judicial precedent based upon the Charter. Likewise, in 2021, a conversion therapy bill was passed into law. It's called the Conversion Therapy Bill, or words of that sort, and is designed to ban counseling that would seek to change or oppress a person's non-heterosexual or non-cisgender identity. While this bill was criticized fairly frequently by the opposition, the Conservative opposition perceived it as merely a dog whistle used by the Liberal Party to try to reveal social conservatism within their ranks, and they did not rise to the challenge, and therefore they did not contest it on third reading, and they allowed it to pass. Each of these bills, each of these, in one case a government regulation, in the other case legislation, in fact, which now is in the Criminal Code of Canada, have a very clear intent to control one's personal beliefs on particular subjects, much of which are obviously related to religious belief. In the 2021 election, the government then doubled down on the strategy by promising to eliminate the right of pregnancy support centers to claim charitable status. That is now currently a professed goal of the government, to eliminate the charitable status of crisis pregnancy centers, which are generally associated with the pro-life cause. And so the freedom to question government policy on abortion and same-sex marriage serves the Liberal government as an effective wedge in urban areas. In particular, it gains them this plurality of the votes that they require in order. It's a useful wedge that they can use during political campaigns to get votes from other left-wing political parties, for example, or and to guarantee themselves a plurality that will actually win them an election. In June of 2020, now, so I would say, in a general sense, that would suggest that the Liberal Party is a highly secularist party that has a very aggressive policy of trying to eliminate people of faith from public life. However, as I've mentioned before, it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent in its application because of the kinds of constituencies that the Liberal Party seeks to cater to. So in June of 2021, the Quebec government introduced legislation specifically, so this is specific to the province of Quebec and not to the rest of the country, aimed at banning public displays of religiosity in the public sector in that province. It affects anybody who has anything that looks religious that they are wearing. So that might affect a person who wears a hijab, for example, or a person who wears a crucifix around their neck, or obviously a Sikh who dons a turban. And none of these people are allowed to do so in the public service. So that would affect teachers who are in the public service. That would affect anyone in the civil service. It means effectively that they lose their job based upon their public display of religiosity. In this case, for Christians, it's actually a fairly simple matter to remove the crucifix from around your neck if you happen to, or the cross from around your neck if you happen to wear a necklace with a cross on it. But much more difficult for a person who happens to be a person of Muslim faith or a person of the Sikh faith who is more likely to feel that they need to demonstrate their religiosity publicly. So while each of the federal parties except the Bloc Québécois oppose this bill, Bill 21, their opposition is generally muted by their electoral chances within the province of Quebec. The Conservative Party tends to favor provincial rights to legislate in a wide variety of areas and does not wish to stand against the wishes of possible Conservative voters in the province of Quebec. So they have tended to be fairly muted in their opposition to this bill. The Liberal Party also has very strong electoral roots in Quebec. The Prime Minister himself represents a Quebec riding. He's famous for having said so once, and fears a direct fight over this bill as well. Only the NDP, currently led by a practicing Sikh, has vocally opposed the measure. Nevertheless, as a kind of proxy for their decision to soft pedal opposition to the bill, the Liberal Party does seek to cultivate a strong relationship with specific minority communities, especially Muslims. In 2017, a Liberal backbencher circulated a motion that condemned specifically Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. That's a direct quote, conflating racial identity with religion as a means of downplaying bigotry against particular religious beliefs. It's noteworthy, and I think perhaps ironic, to realize that at the very same moment, her government was actually trying to silence people with particular kinds of religious beliefs. The Prime Minister has backed this up with public appearances at memorials for Muslims slain in attacks in Quebec City and in London, Ontario. Note that he's made these appearances a priority, while at the same time ignoring, for example, self-professed priorities such as the first day of peace and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in this past September. So clearly it is a priority for him to cater to particular communities of religion. In Canada, these issues of religious freedom are being muddied by the continuing debate over government responses to larger challenges such as climate change and vaccination against COVID-19. So the government has found it convenient to conflate, for example, climate change denial or vaccine hesitancy with other kinds of perspectives that might be socially conservative, such as pro-life positions or such as positions on LGBT issues. So widening the definition of those who are viewed as social pariahs in the eyes of the state contributes to a polarizing strategy that is understood to unite voters who might otherwise vote for the left-wing alternatives such as the NDP, the Greens, or the Bloc Québécois. This deliberate politicization and reification of freedom of religion and belief in some ways reflects the views, I think, of some of the prominent scholarly critics of religious freedom. For example, the late Saba Mahmood and Elizabeth Shackman Hurd, who both criticized the Religious Freedom Project as something that speaks specifically to the concerns of Christians, and maybe even more specifically to Protestants. They argue that religious freedom is part of a larger constellation of issues that surround discrimination. So religious freedom, in their view, should not be isolated. It should be attached to other kinds of things. Note, for example, the liberal policy of attaching it to race, for example. They also suggest that calls for greater religious freedom cannot be separated from the larger political fabric. And I think their arguments do hold some weight, but I fear that they simply give ammunition to those who would seek to downplay religious freedom in secular societies as merely some kind of an extension or a dog whistle used for broader political purposes. So to my mind, there are a couple of things that are really necessary in terms of practical suggestions that flow from that. And one is to very clearly conceptually separate freedom of religion and belief away from the specific constellations of religion and belief. So for example, making it less difficult, less simple for governing authorities to conflate, for example, vaccine hesitancy with other forms of religious belief. Or to conflate, for example, one's position on abortion, which fairly frequently has absolutely nothing to do with religion, from religious belief and from religious identity. The other is to demonstrate that freedom of religion and belief is not a political plot of some sort associated with only one type of belief or religion, but that it is in fact a value that should be held dear by everyone, no matter their religion or belief or lack of belief for that matter. Those are just a few observations that I made from the Canadian case. As I say, I think Canada is probably far ahead of other countries when it comes to this chilling effect, to the extent that it would almost be an even clearer and perhaps even more dramatic case if we were to add it to the others in this report.
Thank you, Paul, for highlighting the political dynamics in Canada, which are behind the chilling effect. That was very interesting. So last but definitely not least, I welcome Jeanette to the floor. Jeanette at Buckingham. And Jeanette is currently executive editor of the International Journal for Religious Freedom. She holds a PhD in public law from the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa and is a professor of political studies at Trinity Western University with a research focus on religious freedom law in Canada and internationally. She is also co-director of the International Institute for Religious Freedom, which is based in Vancouver. Wonderful to have you here, Jeanette, and please take us through your presentation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And I have to say, I'm very pleased to see this report. And I asked Dennis if he could share my PowerPoint because I have technological difficulties with doing that today. But in 2020, the journal had a special issue on secularism, and
Excuse me.
Can,
Sorry to stop you. Can the host please give me the rights to share my screen? Yeah.
that will help.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, Jen. Thank you. Yeah.
No, that's necessary, definitely. Yeah, because I did want to just share with you a little bit about the journal, just to show that it was a bit of a starting place for looking at issues of the chilling effect in countries where secularism is predominant. So I'll let Dennis able to chat.
So I cannot share the screen. It says the host disables participant screen sharing. So I need the host to give me those rights, please.
Okay, Dennis, you're gonna be made a host now.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Perfect, perfect.
Ready.
Wonderful. So Dennis, if you could move on just to the cover of the journal. So this is volume 13 of the International Journal for Religious Freedom. It is available online at IIRF.org. So that's a pretty simple website, but I can put it in the chat after I finish talking about it. And Dennis, could you share the next slide, please? This is the table of content. And you can see that there are, Dennis actually referred to the article titled Death by 1,000 Cuts, looking at the overall situation of, we often think of religious persecution as being, people who are jailed or facing criminal charges, or even facing death for their faith. But often in secular countries, there is this death by 1,000 cuts in the sense of being, having numerous smaller matters adding up to the larger issue of feeling under pressure for your faith, and thereby feeling this chilling effect that I can't say anything about my faith. The article on Mexico in the journal says that people are afraid children in schools, people in jobs are afraid to tell anyone about their faith because they'll be bullied, they'll be marginalized in a job situation, they may not get a promotion. And so we see this in many, many different countries. We see this in France, in Mexico, and as Paul was also sharing, in Canada. So I commend this issue to you for some further examples of the chilling effect of secular intolerance on religious freedom. So just following up on what Paul Rowe was sharing, that if you could move to the next slide, there was a recent poll done in Canada about people's views, the general population's views on religion. And I think when you look at the slide and you look over on the right-hand side and you see the views of people of no religion, and this is a poll done in Canada, the people of no religion, 39% think that religion is very bad or more bad than good in society. The no religion category in Canada comprises about 20% of the population. So if you are a religious person and you see a poll like that, that definitely puts a chilling effect on whether you're going to publicly share about your religious faith. Moving on to the next slide. You can see on the left-hand column, maybe hopefully I know that the typing is very small on this, but it is particularly evangelical Christianity and Islam that are seen as more bad than good. There are some of the religions that are seen as either neutral or net positive. But if you are an evangelical Christian or you're a Muslim in Canada, you definitely would feel that that's something that you might want to keep to yourself, keep private. And then the last slide shows how religious people feel about how much society makes room for their personal values and religious beliefs. And you can definitely see that evangelical Christians are feeling, more than 50% of evangelical Christians feel that society is not making space for them. And a little over 25% of Muslims share those beliefs as well, that society is not making room for them. And I mean, the poll kind of bears that out, that society does not, the Canadian society does not really appreciate evangelical Christians or Muslims. Thank you, Dennis. You can stop sharing now. So I just point these things out, and you can see, as Paul was sharing, that Canadian society is moving very far down this route. I think these kinds of studies and this kind of interviewing and polling shows how society is more and more, secular society, secularized societies are more and more marginalizing
Jeanette?
people of religious faith. Yes?
I'm sorry, but your screen is frozen. Oh, now it's working again. Sorry.
Okay, well, I will wrap it up because I have to say my internet has not been very reliable today. But I want to thank the people who wrote this report and encourage further research and study in this area for better understanding. I also agree with the recommendations that we need to be advising people of religious faith what their rights are and training them how to share their beliefs in ways that are defensible in our society, that are not seen as spreading hatred, because that's often an argument that's made, that religious beliefs are spreading hatred against others. And that is not at all the case. And I think when people properly understand how to share their religious beliefs, they can do it in such a way that, that they can be tolerated more in society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. I'm sorry you're having technical issues, but you managed it despite the problems to be with us tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon. I'm sorry. Yeah, also thank you for providing those numbers there. I thought they were really interesting. It's a good background information to have, actually. Yeah, so we're at the end of our panel. I want to thank all the panelists for joining us tonight. It was really a pleasure of having you, and you know, just speaking about this in public and not being afraid to speak about it in public, not self-censoring about this. So we will now have about 20 minutes or 15 minutes, I would say, probably, for Q&A. So you can either virtually raise your hand or type your question into the chat. I know it's always hard to be the first one. No questions so far? Yes, Terry?
It's not a question, I'm just going to contribute something. Coincidentally, I wrote a series of stories a few months ago about cancel culture and the woke culture and how Christians can respond to that. And I don't know, and then also coincidentally, just coming up in our Archdiocese of Vancouver here, an educator who has a series of presentations that he presents quite often to other educators and to parents. And the presentation is called Awake from Woke, trying to give people ammunition to fight against woke culture and cancel culture. He's been asked to present to the priests in our archdiocese. And so there's some positive signs there that that people are aware of this, of the chilling effect of cancel culture, and are educating themselves to fight back and to arm themselves with the arguments that they can use in the public domain. So that's a bit of good news. I just wanted to share it with people.
Thank you. Miriam, you wanted to say something? Please unmute yourself.
It's just that, so I am in the pro-life, pro-family organizations. And whenever we speak in public, for example, just recently, only last week, we issued a press release. It's always the anti-choicers, anti-freedom conservatives. And the press release would be phrased in normal secular language, and yet they keep hoping to stick these labels onto us. You know, I mean, there is nothing we can do about that, I guess, because it's their intent. So no amount of training, you know, can make us not stick these labels onto us. And we are aware of this. And so we try to argue on ethics, science, you know, and in a logical manner. And yet they keep sticking on these labels onto us. So, I mean, where does that leave you in such a situation?
Maybe one of the panelists wants to answer, maybe Simon, I don't know.
Yeah, I see that all the time, and so one of the things I wanted to pick up again, and again I think the report touches on this, is that, you know, secularism is not neutral, but there is this sort of idea that secularism is the neutral worldview and that we're the biased ones. I think this is a linked point. The way in which the media often operates is presenting itself as neutral and impartial, when in fact they're not. But but rather than taking the approach that we would tend to take, which is explaining, you know, what our beliefs are, and then seeking to justify them. So, you know, identifying our beliefs, identifying our biases, indeed, but then seeking to justify and explain them. They don't do that. They just claim to be neutral. They claim to be impartial, and that gives them kind of great power to change people's minds and to sort of populate the minds of viewers and listeners and readers with things which, you know, they take to be sort of neutral facts, when in fact they are they're biased and partial. And this trick of, you know, just sort of introducing people with our views with labels designed to frighten off the listener. I remember years ago my director doing an interview on the BBC, and his opponent was a gay rights activist who had recently stood as a candidate for a left-wing party. Now, I'm not making a left-wing or right-wing point here, I'm just using this example. So the gay activist was introduced by his name. My director was introduced as Colin Hart from the Right-Wing Christian Institute. We are not right-wing. We are not party political at all. We're a registered charity. But the BBC interviewer put that label on him as a way of signalling to the listener, don't listen to this person. In terms of what we can do about it, I think we have to call it out when we see it. And I just wanted to say, on a slightly more positive note, I have had experience of newspapers, you know, writing up things to do with the Christian Institute where they've put in these kind of inaccurate descriptions and frankly slurs. And I've contacted journalists and contacted their sub-editors, and occasionally you can have a reasonable conversation with them and they'll change it. So that's that's one thing we can do, is to just, you know, try and have the conversation with them and to make them realize that they're not being fair to us. And occasionally that message gets through.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much. Terry, do you have another question, or is this hand still up?
Oh, it's a new question. It's a question. Thank you. Yeah, put my hand up again. And to any of the presenters, how effective do you think it is to use the language of human rights in defense of religious rights and the religious and the rights of religious people to free speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression? Do you find in any of your experience that's effective, or does it somehow rebound back against us somehow? I mean, there's everybody, according to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, has a right to free speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, those sorts of things. I don't see people using that, embracing that to defend their right to hold their perhaps minority views in the secular society. Is that an effective strategy? Simon or Dennis or Federica, anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, if I may, Terry, this is a very interesting question. Of course, the academic argument would be to make the point that the whole complex of human rights is actually inspired by Christianity and more broadly the Judeo-Christian worldview, and that we need to reclaim the human rights from the perspective, and that may very well work, may also not work, because the main problem we're facing, I think, is primarily secularization. And secularization has one important consequence, is that there are in our Western societies, there's an increasingly growing number of people that have no familiarity with any faith, including the Christian faith, although they may be very spiritual and very much interested in new religious movements, etc. And therefore, I think that is the main issue we have to deal with. Now, there's sometimes categories that Christians tend to use that I personally have a problem with. For example, would I describe myself as heterosexual? No, I'm not heterosexual. I'm a man and I'm faithful to my wife, and that's all. And so I don't feel. I think if I would describe myself as being a heterosexual, that would have all kinds of other implications and connotations. So I'm uncomfortable with using those labels myself, and because those labels are actually imposed by others, and they set the language. But yes, I don't have an absolute answer to your question, but I just wanted to raise a few points. We can definitely and should reclaim human rights as something that came forth out of the Judeo-Christian heritage. At the same time, the main problem is not so much the language, could be, but the main problem is simply that there is an increasingly smaller critical mass of people that are sensitive to what is important to religious people. And therefore, I think I just want to come back to this important point of religious literacy and religious sensitivity, and also religious freedom literacy. I think those things are important. Now, this being said, there are enough examples where court cases have been won and political debates have been won by using the human rights language. So it's not absolutely impossible, but you need to be cautious. Yeah, thank you.
May I continue?
Yes, go ahead, please.
To Terry's question, I remember asking, in my studies that the teacher told me that in the, I don't know what is it called in English, the room where all the teachers have their break, where they meet, he says, of course he could draw on a legal basis that he has the freedom of speech and also he has the freedom of religion in Germany. It's all no problem at all. But does he want to go to this room every day feeling like the pariah. So there may be a legal, there may be a formal right to express your opinion and stand for it, but in everyday life and on the interactional level, people are not. It would be a great burden to carry from day to day that you are being socially isolated. And I think this cannot be underestimated. You can be right as much as you want, but if you're being isolated, I think this is a cost much higher for many people. And this is what keeps them from pursuing their opinions in public, even among colleagues. The same teacher, and I heard this a couple of times, said in Germany there's an awareness for freedom of religion, only it's applied to Muslims much more than to Christians, for example. So people said that in schools, Muslim students can voice much more also non-politically correct things. It's okay for Muslims because they're under some safe space, but Christians should never allow themselves to say that. So this is another interesting perspective to look at. And I wanted to add something to the question of the intolerant, hostile environment by the media. This is what almost everyone that I asked told me about. So in Germany, it's not the rigid secular intolerance on every corner. It's more a culture of debate that is very hostile. And this is what I wanted to add. It's not only hostility or the belief, although we're not in France, that private religion belongs to the private sphere, but it's a lot of ignorance. So we have a very high percentage of people that are not atheists, but just religiously not interested people. And so for them, it's, so if you have to deal with colleagues, for example, that just don't know about this, makes it a lot harder. And we found in Germany, it's probably true for other countries as well, but in Germany, I could say that geography matters. That's what I wrote in the report. So we have a much higher tolerance in the South for certain expressions of religion than in the North, because of several things. And one last thing I wanted to add to this thing of make known to your partner in the debate that his or her standpoint also is a standpoint and or a belief and not a natural given thing. And I was very interested to hear from cases that and this is a regular thing right now, that in universities, even in the natural sciences, where you might think people know a lot about epistemology and the science of knowledge. And even there, it seems that a real debate and a real exchange of arguments about the basis of our assumptions, the basic assumption is not being carried through anymore. So there are certain standpoints, certain beliefs that I would, as a sociologist of religion, I would say evolutionism, for example, is a belief or a certain assumption that cannot be questioned. So, and you would think in universities, there must be the highest openness that you could ever find, but it's exactly the opposite. Thanks.
Thank you, Friederike. Teresa, you wanted to add something as well? There's just a quick reminder, we have about 3 minutes left.
Yes, I just want to add an idea about the strategy of speaking from a human rights perspective. I think that this can be different according to the area. I think if we improve training about religious freedom from a human rights perspective in the political or government sector, this can help to reduce, at best, to reduce the different scenarios of hostility against Christians, and this eventually can help Christians to feel more comfortable speaking or sharing their views. I think this is a long process, but it can be more effective in this area than maybe others.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Yeah, I think we have to come to an end, unfortunately. Always goes by very quickly and usually a bit over time, but still, I really hope that you enjoyed it. And again, I want to thank all of the panelists, but also all the people who participated today. I hope it was interesting for you. Thank you for taking the time, whether it was in whatever time zone it was. But that's also great that, you know, we get together from all different continents. I think that's just a benefit of this today. And yeah, if you have any further questions, you can always reach out to either OLIRE, the IIRF, or OIDAC. It's probably also helpful to know that you can download the full report from each organization's website. So yeah, just go on there and you'll find it to download. So from my side, there is only one thing that I would like to add, and it has been mentioned before by Simon, but also Janet, and it's a quote from Dennis' publication, Death by 1,000 Cuts. And yeah, I just wanted to give that to you to reflect on, to take home with you. And the quote is, "It would be wrong to assume that because several court cases are being won and because the number of court cases have diminished in some areas, the pace of secular intolerance is decreasing. Rather, the court cases have had a chilling effect on conservative Christians who often resort to self-censorship, mainly to avoid going through the trouble and anxiety of a court case that lead in turn to the disruption of careers, advanced stress, bullying at work, and other negative experiences, as our interviews indicated." And I think that's very much also in line with another finding where, and for me, that was the saddest one, to be honest, and that was that in the end, especially with younger, uneducated people, the price for your belief just becomes too high. So in the end, you would maybe even neglect it. Yeah, that would probably be the most severe outcome of this. Yeah, maybe Dennis, you can close us off with some last remarks.
Yes, thank you very much for convening this panel. Thank you once again to all the panelists and their enlightening comments and observations. This report is really exploratory in nature. It's only a starting point, I think what we should do next is continue in this effort, apply it certainly to more cases, but also move towards a better understanding of the self-censorship phenomenon. And there is, of course, at the end of the result of the report, a whole list of recommendations. And I would like to encourage everyone in the audience to take up those recommendations and integrate them in their work. And there's this of course has to be a collective effort. And what we're merely trying to do here is to give the topic of self-censorship more visibility. because once it's visible, once it's understood, once it's recognized, we can also start to think about responses, and those responses really are outlined in the recommendations, but they include, of course, religious literacy training, awareness raising, and a couple more. But that's I think the direction that we should be going. And of course, it's difficult from the exploratory nature of this, the inductive nature of this report, to generalize findings, but it's certainly a very good starting point. And I think the time we shared today with all the panelists really was significant, and helps us to move further in this direction. So I would like to thank you all the partner organizations, and I look forward to seeing you again. We are, of course, at your service. I'm also at the IIRF, the International Institute for Religious Freedom. Yeah, please also pick up a copy, digital copy of the International Journal for Religious Freedom. You'll find it very, very helpful. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, also, if you want to have a copy, we can send a printed copy to you if you need that. Okay. See you. Bye.